I will talk about Out of Mesopotamia, how it came about briefly, and I will read my author's statement, and then I'll read a few brief excerpts from the book itself. And as I do that, I will make some explanations about where we are in the book and what it's all about. But before I do all that, I'll just talk about how Out of Mesopotamia came about. It came about because, as we were just told, I spent quite a bit of my life and time in the Middle East, specifically Iran. And when the ISIS phenomena began in Iraq and Syria, I was here, and for an extended period of time. And one of the things I was struck by with this phenomenon, it was taking place very, very close to our borders, to the people I love and my family, my friends in Tehran. And at the same time, I felt the milieu I come from in Tehran and other places in Iran, there seemed to be a disconnect about the reality of this danger that was posed by the phenomenon of ISIS. At some point, literally knocking on the gates of Baghdad and other places. And the sort of carefree life of my milieu that happens every day, let's say in Tehran and in Tehran's cafe society. And because I've spent quite a long time, hanging out with war photographers, war documentarians, journalists in the region. My previous books have had elements of that. Certainly Tehran at Twilight did. I very quickly, with my partner at the time, we went to Iraq in the very, very start of the war. We went to the south. There were a lot of refugees coming from the north. And then things escalated. ISIS, cut a wide swath through Iraq. And Iran became involved and to stop them. And then Ayatollah Sistani of Iraq, the grand Ayatollah of Shiism, sent out his famous fatwa, and then the Shia Hashd al-Shabi, the People's Forces, gathered together, and Iran created the logistics. And I was a part of all that sort of system that was happening, sometimes as a witness, sometimes with a camera, sometimes engaged in various ways. And I wasn't sure what I was up to, except that this moment in history was important to me in many ways. In other places, I've compared it to our Spanish Civil War. It's not quite the right, it's a bit of an exaggeration, but I wanted to bring home the point that there were various elements that were joining ISIS, and on our side, there were various elements trying to stop it. And it was very much, it had that quality of there were bigger forces at play, sort of pulling the strings. And I was with my boots on the ground, seeing it from that perspective. And I ended up writing a novel about it, even though first I started out by wanting to, aiming to write a nonfiction book. But I thought, in the grand scheme of things, there are things that a novel can do that have staying power, that are not of the moment, of the time. I really wanted to catch the strangeness of combat in the 21st century with social media and close to being able to be in battle in one moment and a few hours later be sipping coffee in Tehran, or just a little bit longer in New York City. my life encompassed all of these places, and in any given week I could be in all 3 or 5 places, and it was very discombobulating and very strange and bizarre and funny and a lot of the times. And I thought the only way I could catch all of that was through the novel. So on that note, I'm going to read my author's statements about the book itself, out of Mesopotamia, and then I'll read a few excerpts. And here we go. I had been working on a film script in Persian, occasionally writing opaque texts on contemporary Middle Eastern art in English, and going to war in Arab lands. The war was around the corner in Iraq and Syria, and always in Afghanistan. It was over our skies in Iran and in the Persian Arab Gulf, where US warships sit perennially waiting. It was in the martyrs I knew personally who were returning in coffins from the battles against ISIS, and the survivors of various fronts who hadn't a clue what to do with themselves when they went back home on leave. Usually these men couldn't wait to return to the war. They were lost in peace and did not know what to do with it. Often they talked about martyrdom, the when and how, and sooner or later they went ahead and got themselves killed. I was a part of all this. I had sorted out, not because peace was tedious. In fact, war and its eternal waiting is a lot more tedious. But because this particular war seemed essential to witness. The world I knew was literally a knife's edge away from it. One day back from the war, I saw men and women sitting in a cafe in downtown Tehran. They were fashionable, beautiful, and oblivious of the horrors taking place just a few hundred miles from them. It was a Friday, which meant it was also art gallery hopping day for them. The words of Marcel Proust about the Great War came to my mind. In the last book of In Search of Lost Time, there's a passage in which the French writer talks about the sting in seeing a veteran on leave, walking the streets of Paris and glancing up at the windows of Café Society, where another world, entirely different from what the soldier knows, is in full swing. I was that soldier, but I was also the people inside the cafes of Tehran, and also New York, where I happen to live and work half of the year. My multiplicity of worlds was paired with that of the fighters I bunked with, who were enamored of posting online the selfies and videos they took before going into battle and dying hours, sometimes minutes later. Once I decided to write about this staggering absurdity, I knew I could not write about only combat, but rather about the convergence of the precious world of art alongside that of war, in a moment where nothing, not even dying for a just cause, is sacred. It was to a large measure a fictionalization of the life I lived over a period of half a decade, but also the lives or combinations of lives of many people I knew, some alive and some no longer. As I wrote this novel of war and art and the life of the writer in a time of war, I was aware of the long shadows of eminences such as Hemingway and O'Brien, whom I have lived with, read raptly, and allude to now and then, while recognizing that my own story comes to the reader from the other side of the lens, so to speak. I write about the men and women whose voices are mostly silenced behind the headlines in Mesopotamia and other killing fields of the Middle East. Yet in doing so, I would like to think that I give voice to that lone soldier whom Proust spoke of 100 years earlier in Paris. So that was my author's statement, and now I will read some excerpts from the book to you. A couple of Arabic words, one of which we also use in Persian, I will point out beforehand. A mokeb is a place where, in war, warriors sort of come to rest and sleep or eat. And our hero spends a lot of his time during the war being part of the mokeb, cooking, like taking care of the place for the warriors who come and go. But it's also a place for pilgrims in other iterations. And the other word in is a satar. A satar is basically a trench in warfare. We called it a satar uh, in Arabic. So this is from the beginning of the book. It takes place in Syria. Most of the book takes place either in Iraq or Iran, but this actually begins in Syria. Lately, the Red House had been a favorite obsession for the enemy. By now, the initial suspicions that the Regulus had for me had settled into a stolid acceptance, even deference. The Iraqi Arabs who were there called me doctor. The Iranians called me professor, while the Afghans preferred commander. None of this was said with irony. We were all getting shot at equally and dying at farcical rates. Distrust under these circumstances doesn't have a place, and in mortars and dushka rounds make no distinction. Nassif had come a week before our night watch asking for volunteers for the Red House. The enemy was desperate to get it back, and there was something absurd about this desire of theirs. Even more absurd was their drive to get back to the town of Khanti, in which the Red House sat. Maybe they thought they could relink with the road to Aleppo from there and pause their recent losing streak. Whatever it was, they were dying for it, which suited us. Nassif said, "The Red House is empty." The rage in his voice was contained but icy. In that simple statement, I saw all the strangeness of this war. What were we doing here? Vultures perched on Mesopotamia's tired bones. I glimpsed Mu'allem, who was my age, a hardened veteran of the Iran-Iraq war of 30-odd years earlier, wheezing and writing in his notebook. He couldn't write a war diary if his mother's life depended on it, but I wasn't going to tell him that. More than anyone, he had warmed up to me, reminiscing about how the Karbala 4 battle of back in the day was the mother of all battles, though he should have said mother of all defeats. He lost 2 cousins and 3 dozen comrades in that bleak epic. Maybe it was there where he was gassed. I never asked him about it, and he didn't offer details. Mu'allem wheezed and gradually died over these 30 years, yet he kept at it. War for him was a kind of essence. He breathed it. Without it, he ceased to be. Mu'allem too, like Nassif, would soon be dead. I would not be there at Khanti when it happened. They'd bring me 4 of his notebooks filled with daily minutiae of war in Syria, tasking me to edit them into something comprehensible for publication. They were mostly banal observations about weapons, the 120 mortar, the 60, the lethal, unavoidable cornet, which they said eventually killed him. A lot of scribbling about his faith and the faith of his companions in those pages. He wrote about fasting for days on end when there was not much else to do here, about going to Damascus to pay his respects at the Zainab shrine. He wrote about martyrdom and never let up on that subject. Martyrdom was our shibboleth. We distinguished each other's sincerity by the way someone talked too little or too much about it. We knew who was lying and who was telling the truth when they prayed for martyrdom. We were adept at intuiting when a guy was ready to leave this world. A certain light, a halo even, would surround him. He became extra kind. His prayers turned heroic. He cried a lot. This was not always the case, and maybe not all of these things happened at the same time, but they happened enough times that my martyr radar was strong. I knew when a man was finally tired and felt like he had done his share of protecting the holy places and was ready to leave this world. How could I go back to Tehran and order coffee on Karim Khan Avenue after this experience? How to contemplate leaving this geography? So basically, that gives a general overview of who this guy is. He's a journalist who does many things, but now he's covering war. But he's become he's gotten himself neck deep in the war. He's not just a casual bystander. And in the mocha, uh, he befriends a squad of Iranian snipers who are all volunteers. They clawed and begged their way to get to Iraq to fight, and that is the truth. A lot of people came there completely voluntarily, and I saw it. And so he befriends these Iranians who visit him at the Mocha now and then, and other Arabs, Iraqi Arabs. And they hang out in this place across the Mocha in another building. And one of them that he loves very, very much, this one Iranian sniper, his name is Ali Akbar. He dies in one of the battles. And his three other friends, he calls them the three magi. So I'll read from a section towards still the beginnings of the book. Before long, Khaled took the heavy truck and went to join the government forces gathering outside Mosul. I could not blame him. Mosul was his home. The waiting here was like cultivating mold. And after Ali Akbar's premature death, even martyrdom seemed questionable, though we never mentioned it. Then a man in charge of intelligence for the formidable Kataib forces came up from Baghdad and ordered the rest of the Iranian sniper team, the three Magi, to go south with him and then home. One dead Persian from a sniper squad was enough to put him through the ringer. He didn't want more. This left me alone to my sealed-in circumstances. I smiled a lot at my revolving door of Iraqis who were specially enamored of this thing called Facebook, and who watched me wide-eyed when I explained I did not yet have an account. Who knows if years from now the name will even ring a bell, but back then in that geography, this virtual republic of Facebook was the river that connected the Arab warriors. They took pictures of themselves 5 minutes before dying, then 3 minutes before dying, if luck and bandwidth were with them. Their on the last thing that might be thought sacred, combat. We should have already known nothing was sacred. We were simulations. In another year or two, tourists would probably be roaming this very ground where Ali Akbar had stepped stupidly on a tripwire inside a school building while we took that village. We were, in other words, ornaments. And then I'll read another brief section towards the very middle of the book, where all of these people that he's known near the Moab have gone, and he goes back to the place they used to hang out at, and new people are there. That night, the big guns aiming towards Syria would not give it a break. Unable to sleep, I walked across the road to where Khaled used to keep house and where Ali Akbar and the three Magi of the sniper team would come every afternoon unless they were pulling duty at the Satar. It seemed like a lifetime ago. In real terms, only a few months had passed. Nostalgia can blanket a man when the people who populated the dangers he knew are no longer there. I knocked on the door and no one answered, but people were staying here. Recently washed clothes hung from clotheslines. I knocked again, and when there was still no answer, I let myself in. Same room. Nothing had changed, except for the fighters who lived here, while the war continued. In a corner, the same mattress lay where Shorty, one of the three Magi, had taken a long sleep after his best friend Ali Akbar's martyrdom. Shorty was a compact 20-something from Qom whose prayers tended to go on interminably. That day, the way he slept after Ali Akbar was killed, it was as if he were cleansing himself of something. When he woke up, it was like he had slept 1,000 years, and during that time he had made many ablutions. We didn't talk about Ali Akbar again until Tehran. I crawled onto the mattress and closed my eyes. Before long, there were men in the room, all of them young Iraqis, their AKs hanging off the same hooks where Khalid and Martyr Ali Akbar and the three Magi used to hang their weapons. The television was on. This was new. There hadn't been a TV before, and they seemed to clearly receive the channels broadcasting from the Gulf. I sat in silence alongside the other men, watching a Hollywood movie in English with Arabic subtitles. Every single actor in the film looked astounding, the women and the men. A story about a future world where survivors of some catastrophe live in a bubble, and the heroine is mermaid-like and more beautiful than anything in the Arabian Nights. We were mesmerized. Just a few kilometers from the Satar, we sat watching the world of the beautiful, their fictions broadcasting right into this broken room that the enemy almost managed to capture some months ago on their way to steal fuel they needed to get them to the capital of their fictitious empire down the road in Syria. I do not know how to translate any of this. I do not know in how many worlds a person can live simultaneously before they lose themselves completely. There is not language enough to explain all of this. And then I have two more brief sections to read to you. Now, this is towards the middle still. One thing about this war was that on paper, Iran and the US were fighting the same common enemy. And when you're in these situations, all kinds of things go through your head, all kinds of things happen, Um, basically, your convoy passes their convoy. I called it like ghosts in the afternoon passing each other. Ostensibly, you're on the same side, allies, but everything is waiting to be blown up, and there's a lot of bad feeling, a lot of bad blood on both sides. And the hero tries to convey that in this passage. Blame seemed to be going around today. Everyone drank their tea and said God's name too many times. The Americans were always the object of derision in these conversations. Their occasional air support for us questionable at best. On the surface, we were fighting on the same side for a change, and against an enemy that wanted the earth itself to be gone. Over at places like Palmyra in Syria and Mosul down the road from us, the enemy had gone on orgies of destruction of all things ancient, afterwards gloating in their sick cruelty over priceless historical stones that could not fight or talk back. No wonder then that in the Mocha and up and down all the Satars of the war, we quietly saw ourselves as the soldiers of civilization, even if no one else believed us or gave a shit. It was not something that was talked about, but it was there in the air of every minor battle. And in the newscasts out of Iraq too. This was Nineveh, after all, the ancient capital of the Assyrians, the Nineveh of the Bible and the vast 2,700-year-old stone tablet library it had once held. We were certain we were fighting for something bigger than just Mesopotamia, and we were eating the bullets that the Americans, who despised our skin and our faces and our weapons, should have been eating right alongside us. The Americans saw us as rodents, and we saw them as a hollow Goliath. They laughed at our poetry and queer dancing in the middle of war, while we wept and held wakes after their friendly fires that killed our brothers. I wondered if anything at all, could ever bridge these suspicions. And then finally, towards the end of the novel, I chose this to sort of give you a sense of what these landscapes, these desolate landscapes of battle, of war, look like, and more importantly, how it feels to be in those places, especially when you consider all the people you have lost. The country was a flat nothingness. Occasionally, on parallel dirt roads, a dot moved, and we didn't know if the thing was ours or not. Nothing was taken for granted in victory, because victory had been here before, and it always managed to slip away, like fish or happiness. We drove in 3 trucks, hardened men who breathed retribution and the diesel stench of war, and loved it. I sat in front next to the cleric, taking in the murderous smoke of cigarettes that only he and I seemed not to care for. The vehicles putrid with a staleness that is indescribable. If I survived, I would live out my life remembering hours such as this when breathing seemed pointless. My eyes tried and failed to catch the distances where a drone, a plane, a gunship, an enemy suicide truck, a friendly, or really any motherfucker at all who could spook you out of your melancholy might suddenly emerge. But my eyes were lemons, God-given failures that mostly just guessed at the things men spoke of when they pointed into distances and felt for the placement of their weapons. Names. Everywhere there were names. So many combatants and hangers-on and lost souls treading the dying misfortune of Mesopotamia that one got lost in the maze of titles and martyrs and those waiting in line. I had developed a fear of returning to the places where war was at a respite or non-existent. Though dangerous, Tal Abtah was still a few kilometers too far away from the action. I would rather go back to our Mokeb and wait for the enemy to strike again. It would have been suicide on their part to hit us once more, but suicide was their stuff of life, and somehow I held the unreasonable faith that if only I stayed at the Mokeb long enough, all the dead would return as if they were ghosts on a catwalk. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Abbas Milani. It is my very distinct pleasure to welcome back to Stanford my dear friend, Salar Abdoh, and easily one of the most accomplished Iranian writers writing in the English language, and writing in the English language in several different genres. He has written what has been called one of the best spy thriller novels, The Poet Game, for example. He has essentially introduced noir writing to Iran and collected a very incredible selection of noir writing and translated them. He's a professor of creative writing at New York. And now he has written what has been claimed by many critics, the best war novel about the war in Iraq and Syria. Abdul comes from a very unique family. I think some of you who are not from Iran must learn a little bit about his family. For those of you who are soccer fans, his father was the owner of Persepolis, one of the 2 most important teams in Iran, beloved by many and hated by others. His brother is easily one of the most accomplished playwrights and directors, Reza Abdul. And the novel, and I urge you to read this novel because it is a gripping, brilliant, profoundly tragic, often comic, very ironic, but very telling account of the war that we have all heard about. I was telling Salar before we began that a few years ago, when ISIS was at its height, I gave a couple of talks on ISIS, and I read much of their writing in English, and I had an image of them, their madness, their despotism. But reading this and reading both sides of the war as he depicts it brings a totally new perspective on this, for me at least. One great critic said the purpose of art is to defamiliarize reality. And what this novel does is it defamiliarizes everything you think you know about Iraq, about Syria, about ISIS, about Hashd al-Shabi, about the Afghans who are sent to die in Syria by the Iranian regime and by the Iranian system itself. It offers a very different view. I truly recommend that you should try to purchase this because it both reads well and it's extremely informative. And he has decided to publish the book with a publisher that essentially publishes iconoclastic authors, people who don't want to go through the grind of the big publishing house. And when I read it, I always thought throughout reading it that if Colden Houghton of A Catcher in the Rye was sent to war with the writing capacity of the writer of Homage to Catalonia and the cynicism of Catch-22 character, Yossarian. That is the novel they would get. So if you get this, you get a combination of these rather remarkable sensibilities and offering you an engrossing page turner of a novel, which the first question I have to ask is, how do we separate the Salar, the writer, from the Saleh, who is the narrator? There's, as you said, a lot of autobiographical novels. It's almost like a roman à clef. We're always trying to figure out who these people are, what these events are to. How do we avoid this temptation and read it, not as a memoir, but as a fiction?
Thank you, dear Abbas, Dr. Milani. I have to repeat that it's such an honor to be in your presence. Years and years ago, I may have repeated this last time I was here, but years and years ago when I was in Berkeley, I essentially wrote my first short story ever as a young man while I was still in college. And you happened to read it. It was a story of a pair of shoes and the shoe was talking, and we had invited you to our Iranian group, and you said to me, you gave me words of encouragement, and that was like my first critique ever that I received, and I'll never forget that, and has stayed with me. And to go back to your question, we write novels for various reasons, and we choose what point of view and what perspective to use in a novel. When I started to write this novel, I quickly realized that, as I also say in the author's statement, I realized I'm not going to stray too far from myself. It doesn't mean everything is autobiographical in this novel, but even in the places that I had to do some research, everything comes from a place of, let's say, truth. Everything sort of happened, or combinations thereof. And when I started writing, I thought the best way to depict this, I'm not going to change this person's name too far from myself, Salar, Saleh, like even where he lives in Tehran is sort of like where I live. And there were various reasons for that. But you mentioned Orwell, Homage to Catalonia, and all of these amazing writers whom I've read deeply over the years, war writers and others. I thought this is a novel that craves the truth, but the truth in our age is so truly absurd in our age, where in an age where the disconnect between war and peace is sometimes is only a few miles away. I've been, for instance, in places in the Middle East where the enemy was literally 20 kilometers away, and if they caught you, the things they would do to you is beyond imagination. And 20 kilometers away, let's say in a place like Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan, life went on as if nothing is going on. And like these sorts of disconnects, or like for instance, in the novel, the hero and Saleh, he's using his Iran cell phone to to talk to people because his Iraqi cell phone is that he has the bandwidth in Iraq, and things like that, and then all the things that happen with the martyrs, and then the reality of like people think of martyrdom, it's an abstraction for them, but it's not an abstraction, it's a reality, and it has it and it's ritual and it's theater and it has its very set moments. It has a narrative, and when you put all of that together and you write a novel, uh, you don't need to create too much. You don't need to go into your fantasies too much, and because you don't need to do that. I'm talking about me, I decided in this novel to just sort of stick close to myself, because if I were going to create more of everything, the novel itself might start to become, to fall apart, because it would lose an essential reality that I wanted to hold on to, as much as that reality was driving me insane, to be honest.
I don't want to take too much of your time. I mean, because we have questions, we want to get to the audience question, but some the readings that you gave don't, I think, don't give a sense of some of the remarkable figures that are here. I just want to ask you to comment on one of them, for example. Proust plays a very important role in this narrative. Could you tell the audience how you came across the Proust text and how it then circulates all around between you and the martyrs and the watchers, who is constantly watching you to make sure you are within the bounds of what you can write, where you can go?
Sure, absolutely. Proust plays a very big, he's like a sort of a foil in this novel. When I came to live in Iran for the first time after the revolution, right after the war, I was very young, just finished college in California, and I brought with me 11, 12 huge boxes of books, and I brought Proust with me. And I was reading Proust, and I was underlining as I was reading, and I life led me to other places and other things, and I gave my books, I left my books where it was, and then one day a few years ago when I was here, I saw my Proust in my friend's library, and which was totally fine. But when I was in New York and I was writing the novel, I called him and I said, Ali, could you go to the last book of of uh, of the Proust book and Time Regained, and take a photo of every page where I've underlined something or made a comment? And he did. And he sent it to me via WhatsApp. You can do this stuff in this day and age. And basically I utilized my own underlines of Proust made in my mid-20s for this book. But why Proust to begin with? I've said this elsewhere. Proust in his grand masterwork, he talks about everything that there is in existence, and one of the things that he goes back to time and again is war, because the Great War was happening. It was France, Paris. The so and he talks about, like I talk about in my author statement. Proust talks about watching that soldier, that veteran, on leave, and the disconnect between him and the cafe society. So as I was writing the book, I felt a keen closeness to Proust's observations as a writer, and also closeness to that soldier, because I had worn many hats during this period, and I thought there's no one better to utilize to sort of give that aspect of how it feels to be an outsider and also an insider. And then once I began to execute this in the novel, I decided to, people have various notions. Like, let's say when you're interrogated, in the West, people, the idea just makes them, crazy scared. But like, you can actually be interrogated by someone and in the back of your mind think, I could have a, cello kebab with this guy in another in another life, or we could have a drink or coffee, because like the guy's doing his job, and I don't, not only I don't dislike him, I kind of like this guy in a weird, like way that things happen. And there's always a ceiling to that, of course, and you're aware of it and they're aware of it. But I thought the absurdity of these lives where you have that kind of a job to ask questions, and then you have this, and then you have to make answers. I thought, okay, I'll I'll channel it all through Proust and see what happens. And in some odd, bizarre way, it all kind of worked out.
Yeah. Well, I know that there are lots of questions, but I think in the novel, you do make it clear that I think, at least, that every decision we make is a choice we make, and we are responsible for it. Even to the decision to become an interrogator that reads Proust and doesn't pull fingers is a decision that he or she makes to serve this regime and this cause. And journalists and you are very brilliant in depicting the array of choices that people make, from staying completely out of the system to working within the system, or to working this system. And sometimes it is absurd, and you paint that absurdity, I think. The place where you mention waiting for Godot, and say, if he was here, this is, I think, the novel he would write would be very similar to the novel you have written. Everybody is waiting for Godot.
Absolutely. I think like one of the themes in the novel, like, the hero is very harsh on journalists, the documentary filmmakers, war photographers in general, and he's part of that whole media. So he's harsh on himself because he sees the element of opportunism. When you go to war, or when you make documentaries of people in war, you're basically, they're always in the back of your mind is the thought that you're using these people for your own advantage or career. And a lot of people, a lot of colleagues don't ever ask themselves this question. Our hero Saleh does ask himself that question, and therefore at every turn he's making a choice to try to do the right thing, even though there are times where he has to sell out. But in general, he tries not to fall into that vortex of just doing everything for the sake of in furthering his own career as a, whether it's a war journalist or a reviewer. He writes art reviews, and and so he's always angry. He's a man who comes back from war time and again. And at one point, he's looking at a theater crowd in Tehran, and he thinks about, oh, they're always shoving Samuel Beckett and Chekhov down people's throat. These people have no idea what a real Samuel Beckett landscape looks like. I wish I could take them to Iraq with me for 5 minutes. And, so, he has those angry moments. And those are angry moments that I've had, I've had against people who are my friends, who are living perfectly oblivious lives sometimes in Tehran, let alone New York. And you think about this. This is a troubled world we live in, and sometimes it's easy not to be aware of it. It's very easy not to be aware of this troubled world, whether it's the climate change or wars next to us. And I was that angry man. I was Saleh was an extension of my own anger.
The world
And it
is
took
a
a
better
while.
place.
It took a while to get out of that mode. It
The
wasn't
world
easy.
is a better place because of your anger. So keep writing your anger. Now, I think Roma wants to ask some questions from the audience.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Yeah, we have several questions and comments, so I'll try to get to a few of them. One viewer, just a comment from a viewer, says, "Thanks a lot, Mr. Abdoh, for this great novel. Each sentence catches me, and I sometimes have to read them loud for myself again and again, as if I need to recapture the pleasure of those sentences." Another viewer writes, "Beautiful work, Salar. Your writing took hold of me through the last page," and has two specific questions. One of them you already addressed about Proust, so I'll ask the second one. The viewer writes, "On page 234, you wrote, 'My own mother I visited just once at Behesht-e Zahra Cemetery. I would not visit her again.' Can I ask you why?"
Why the hero will not visit her again? Well, because he's had a very complicated relationship with her, and when he visits her that one time, he sort of puts it to rest, at least in his own mind. He doesn't want to go back and relive something that he'll probably never come to a resolution with.
Thank you. Another viewer writes, "Thinking of Iraq and modern day Iran, what are some conclusions the West should know about regarding media and journalism today?" And a similar question, how has social media or the instant media coverage of today changed the way wars and conflict are reported on?
This is a very complicated thing to answer. You really can't, it's hard to answer it just off one's hat. Social media, the advance of technology has made many things interesting. We can really cover things that we could not cover before. War has changed dramatically. The use of drones has changed things, changed the geography of war and the covering it. But at the same time that all of these capabilities exist, it has also, I think, from what I have witnessed, it has created multiple worlds. And this is not just in war, in everything. So that what happens is while we believe we are covering something, we're bringing information back and forth. What's really happening is that at the same time, that plethora of information, from my experience, is diminishing the reality that's happening in the world, on the ground. Hunger is hunger. It's not going to go away if you beam your video from the town of Biji in Iraq to somewhere in the West. A wound is a wound. Running into a body part or many body parts, losing a friend, losing friends. These are realities, and one of the reasons I don't have social media that much, I barely ever use it. I wish I could use it more. Is that I feel myself. I need that very specific reality that you can touch. And in times of war in these places, I thought that plethora can bring things home, but at the same time it can sort of thin it out. I don't know how to explain it. So it's a very difficult thing to explain, except that I'm not comfortable with it yet.
Thank you. Another viewer writes, you describe the disconnect between veterans who have returned from war and those who have stayed behind. Vietnam War veterans have described the same disconnect upon their return, but also having received hate from those in the US who didn't approve of the war. In your opinion, does modern indifference to wars, quote, over there, traumatize veterans the same way or differently?
Exactly the same way. I was coming from Iraq, and my friends, my milieu, people I love, they were making fun of these fighters going to Iraq and Syria to fight for whatever reason, whether faith or, protecting the holy places. And, I had been there. I had seen the sacrifices they made, and I would come to Tehran every time, and I would be with people for whom these other Persians, Iranians, were just, fools, or people who are, whatever, too religious or this or that. And I thought to myself, I can't abide this. It's these people, whatever reason they have to be there, they're doing something that you're not doing, and you're totally oblivious of. And I felt myself getting angrier and seething in anger every time I went to a party in Tehran, or went to a cafe, or went to see a theater, or went to the museum. And then at that point, I realized, I really did. I thought about it. I thought, I know exactly what the Vietnam War veterans felt. I know exactly how they felt. And that was a very eye-opening moment for me.
Thank you. Viewer writes, how do you think writing in English as a non-native English speaker adds to English literature? I found the structure of sentences and word selections in such novels so different from English-speaking contemporary authors, and I'm wondering how it can change the literature.
Any language that uses in the English language can only be enriched by the variety of writers writing in it from all over the world. Same thing happens to Spanish, same thing happened to Arabic at some point, and probably happens today. We bring our own baggage. It's a beautiful baggage, and sometimes we have to make those little transfers that are not easy to do, and we struggle with it every day. But English is an ocean which is being completely replenished at every moment by people from all over the world, Africa, Middle East, the subcontinent. And it's not always easy for a writer. Sometimes as I grow older, I want to write, I'm driven to write more and more in Persian for reasons that I don't want to get into today. But writing in English enriches me and also enriches the language. But I wish I could reverse it at some point and also write in Persian and Arabic.
Thank you. One viewer asks, was Raymond Chandler, the World War I veteran and author of the Philip Marlowe series of detective novels, an influence on your writing? And if so, how?
No, he wasn't, at least not consciously, but there was a moment in my life where I read Chandler and all of these writers, the whole noir moment that sort of starts in the 1940s and has its heyday and sort of plateaus out at some point. I read a lot of them because I wanted to write those kinds of books as well. So Chandler is not somebody that I consciously think about, but all of these writers are in the back of a writer's mind when you start typing.
Thank you. We have just a few minutes left, so I'm going to read a few questions and let you pick which one you'd like to respond to in the last few minutes. So one question is, what was the most challenging part of writing about war and conflict, or these conflicts in particular that you're writing about? Or someone writes, your biography indicates you still spend time in Iran. What has been the reaction to your writing there? And finally, if you would like to share what you're working on now or what your next project is. So any of those.
I forgot the questions there. What was the first?
No problem. What are some challenging parts of writing about war and conflict, or this conflict in particular?
The pity of war is this most challenging part. Like, everything is condensed, and you're faced with situations that are very difficult, and you have to pass by them, like, because you're in a situation where you have to leave somebody behind. Maybe somebody was killed. Maybe they were your friend. Maybe you have to go and visit, their wife afterwards and say, this is his stuff. These are difficult things to consider, and it's a part of what I call the pity of war. The second question, real quick.
Sure. The second question was, your biography indicates you still spend time in Iran. What has been the reaction to your writing there?
Very, very well. I in the past decade or less than decade, I started to write more and more and publish in Iran. A lot of my essays, before they come out in the West, they actually come out in Iran. And Iran being, in the US, for instance, there's so many things happening at the same time. Sometimes you feel like, and I'm talking fast because I know we don't have time. Sometimes you feel like, you're not making an impact, but I will write an essay, let's say, about my brother, or about, my refugee years when I first was a teenager in the US. And it really affects people here in Iran. And, they write to you, they come up to you on the street. They create podcasts. It's a relationship. Oftentimes in the US, I don't feel like I quite have a relationship, but I'm in a marketplace. They're very two different things. And there was a third question.
Just asking what you're working on next, any upcoming projects.
Yeah, I've already kind of finished what I'm working on next, but I won't talk about it until, inshallah, it comes out.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for joining us and for this wonderful conversation. A reminder that Salar Abdoh's new book, Out of Mesopotamia, is available everywhere you can find books, and we'll include a link in the chat to the publisher. We hope we see you at Stanford again for your next work. Thank you, stay safe, and hopefully see you soon.
Thank you to everyone for being here today, and to Dr. Milani and to Roma and Franco for making this happen.